Well, I'm really pleased to be able to be back with Vanessa and with Carl, who is indispensable to Vanessa and to the project. And so pleased because it's been almost 20 years since we worked together. And I first had the idea for this Kiowa cradle research because we had 3 Kiowa cradles in our collection that actually were named. We knew the families that they came from, and that was highly unusual. And so with funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities and National Endowment for the Arts, I was able to travel back to Kiowa land, to Redstone and Carnegie and Anadarko. And with the help of Jacob Atone, an elder, to meet people who were instrumental in understanding cradleboard making and whose families had the tradition of making them, because it's definitely a family tradition. There was only one young person doing this, and that was Vanessa. So it was extremely important for us to meet and for her to be able to create for us a cradle that is exactly in keeping with the ones that have been made from the late 19th century on and through the early part of the 20th century by her grandmother and great-grandmother and so forth. So just to take a look at the pictures here, on the left you will see Vanessa. She's the little one with the sequin crown on her head, sitting on the lap of her grandmother. And that is the grandmother, I believe, Vanessa, that was instrumental in helping you learn to bead. And you can talk about that a little later. Then beyond that is her grandfather, great-grandfather, who was a noted dancer. And that is something that, as we talked about yesterday with her grandfather, Stevetta Mopope, dancing, music, flute playing, and art, expressive art, all went together hand in hand. On the right is Vanessa wearing the cradle that you see here in the traditional way in which they were carried. And because this is a tradition that is passed down through the generations, we have this, I think, very important picture of the generations of Vanessa's predecessors. Sapoodle on the left was the mother of Keen Cottle. On the right was the mother of Poggy Goat behind. And in Poggy Goat's arms is the wrapped bundle, which is Stevetta Mopope, who later became a very famous Kiowa artist. And these women passed down the tradition of cradle making, and she's going to talk about that more. Now, when part of our Half American Museum project was to bring Vanessa to the museum, and Carl. Carl is also a noted beadworker and also a woodworker, and he makes the boards for Vanessa's cradles. They were both working on one of our older Kiowa cradles, and this was funded through an IMLS conservation grant, in which Native artists work on the objects that are within their tribal knowledge. So she was with us there for about a week or 10 days, she and Carl working in that way. And then another part of this project, which is very important, which Vanessa really, she gave us a real surprise with this one. I went into her home and saw on the wall the picture on the left, which is Poggy Goat, her grandmother, with Stevetta Mopope, her child, in the cradle, peeking out of the cradle. And Vanessa had been looking at that cradle for a long time, looking at that picture. And so one day, but she only had that one side of the cradle. one day she decided to try to make one similar to it, but she had no idea what the colors were. And so the cradle that she's holding in the center picture is her interpretation of the older cradle. And then, as we moved around, Vanessa gave me this picture to take with me as I went to museum collections to see if I could find that cradle. Because that was another thing we were trying to do, to locate cradles wherever they were in private hands or in museums. And lo and behold, in Colorado Springs, the Taylor Museum, there was the cradle that was in the picture. And if you see it, it's on the lower right-hand side. You can see the same side that you see with Polydel carrying it. And you'll notice that the colors are very different because the old black and white negatives, when you looked at, they reverse colors, especially a blue would fade out and become the light background instead of the dark background. So it would be hard to recognize that cradle if you couldn't notice other parts of it. And then as you can see, the other side is very different, but Vanessa had never seen the other side. She only saw what was in the one picture. So with that sort of introduction, I'm going to see what Vanessa would like to say about the cradle and about this cradle and that cradle and whatever, however you want to start.
Well, first, I have to use this thing. Come in. My name is Vanessa Jennings. I'm the oldest granddaughter of Stevetta Mopope and Jeanette Berry. And the Indian allotment that we live on right now, it belonged to my grandmother. And I remember walking to the middle fence, and I remember her telling me, from this to the east boundary, this is going to be yours. And then from this middle gate down to the county roads, this is going to be your sister's. And this cradle represents my sister. My baby sister developed breast cancer, and she had 8 children. And so we went to the doctor on Monday after the 4th of July celebration, and we had an appointment at 9 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, we were at the oncologist. And at that time, they gave us 5 to 7 days to live. And she lived from that time until the morning of November the 12th, which was her favorite son's birthday, his 16th birthday. And when we finished this board, you begin a cradle board with a prayer. When the board was finished, my sister invited who she wanted, and we were all in the little bedroom that she was in. And that was the first time when she touched this cradle board that she was able to say, "This cancer's going to kill me." And so I remember I told her, I said, this cradle board is going to the Happen-Repper Museum. I said, and I'm going to call it Stevetta's Cradle. And her name was Papahoma in Kiowa. It's talking about this ruffle around the neck of a buffalo. And she said, someday, she said, when my children come looking for me, she said, I'll be waiting there. So really and truly, it's my sister's, her efforts that have brought us here. I hate talking on microphones. I'm not a good public speaker. What I do best is visit. And so if you'll excuse me, this thing is heavy. It's like holding a sledgehammer. Can we just talk without it? You can hear me, can't you?
Yes.
Okay, I'm good at yelling. We had all of my sister's children, and at night we would we would go and they would make little puppy piles in different rooms. So it never mattered how carefully you counted them. You know, you never could come up with the correct number because they were all squished one on top of the other. And I remember trying to make them sit down and pay attention. You know, this is what we're going to be doing, this is what we're going to be working on. But when you're talking to 4- and 5-year-old children, nothing registers outside of cartoons. And so, you know, none of the children were interested in any of this. And but for my sister, it was something that was really important. Here on the top of the cradle board, there is an umbilical pouch, and it's shaped like a diamond. And in that, I think we're going to get in trouble. I think we better use this.
I can do it.
We're getting a stand.
I can hold it for you. Yeah.
You're brave. When you're looking at this cradle board, one half is designs that belong to my grandmother's side of the family, and on the opposite side are the designs that belong to my grandfather's family. And you can see on the right side it's done in this green background, and on the opposite side it's done in this blue. Up here at the top of the board is a piece of red wool, and it's decorated with antique sequins. And this is you could tell by looking at an object where a person fit within the status of the Kiowa community. The wealthier the family, the more important the family, then the work reflected that family's status. We have more gadgets coming. The sash is just a commercial woven sash, and when you put the cradle board on your shoulders, you take the sash and you spread it out as wide as you can, because the weight of that baby, it distributes the weight more evenly. If you just let it roll up, it's going to hurt, you know, so it's better for you to spread that sash as far apart as you can, and that way it's much more comfortable for you to carry. There was a photograph here at the beginning, and my little grandson is inside of the red wool cradle board. And I didn't realize somebody was saying, "Let me take your picture." So I was posing. They said, "No, turn around." They wanted to take a photograph of my grandson, so I had to turn around away from the camera so they could take a picture of my little grandson.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the designs and how they're handed down in families, and who could use the design?
The Kiowas are really territorial. It doesn't matter if it's a campsite, it doesn't matter if they're beadwork designs, or if the patterns for your concho belt. Once you own something, it can never be renewed without the permission. So it could be 50 years from now, and if you wanted to renew that object, you would have to go to the person who originally owned, that gave you permission to use the designs, in order for you to get permission to use it again. A good example is on the battle teepee. All of those war deeds, they belong to each individual warriors. So when they renewed the battle teepee, then they had to go and talk and get permission from the owner before they could renew that scene and place it on the new battle teepee. And so campsite, you want to see a good fight get started, you let a woman sit up in an old woman's camp, you're going to see a slug match. You know, and my money would be on the old woman and not the young one. You know, my sister loved if she didn't have a good word fight, a good fist fight would do for her. My sister was everything that I'm not. I am a coward. To come here, I talked to Leah because I told Carl, you know, we don't really have to go. And I'll
The night before we left.
And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, getting up.
And I'll tell you why. I wear dentures. He has a puppy that he spoiled. And on my work table, the puppy climbed up on my work table and walked away with my dentures. Somewhere out there on that 80-acre tract, there are a pair of dentures that are there. And I didn't realize how vain I was until I told Carl, let's don't go. And I said, I'll call Leah and I'll tell her, you're sick or I'm sick and we're not going to come. You know, but I talked to Leah, too late. So,
Plans B.
yes, so here I am.
So with your talk a little bit more about your grandmother and what she meant to you and how she learned. It's so unusual that Vanessa is able to do this beautiful beadwork and create the big pieces, not just, you know, little pieces like this, but big pieces, and how that happened.
When we were growing up, the very first job that you have is all of the beads that drop off of her work table. At night, you had to get down on your hands and knees and you had to pick up every loose bead. You didn't waste anything. Nothing was ever wasted in our home. And so we had jars and jars of beads that my grandmother would collect again, and then she would reuse them. She might work on a pair of women's leggings, and maybe she didn't have the right colored bead, so she would go back and pick through the right color in one of these jars. And so it was through her instruction. We started out, you had to learn how to do a peyote stitch, like on a fan handle. You had to learn how to do like the medallion. You had to learn, there were different things that you started with. But I remember the hardest thing to learn how to do the wishbone from a turkey. You know, it has like a little fork. So the idea is that you add or subtract the number of beads so that you can travel up on this left side and then up on the right side. And I remember at the end of the day, my grandmother would look at it and she'd say, you know, I see where you missed a bead. She said, I don't think this is your best work. And she would very carefully undo everything. So now it's your choice. Do you begin again? Do you finish it? And, you know, I was the responsible one. You know, I would sit there and I remember, you know, and my grandmother would say, what did you say? Nothing. You know, but I remember I thought someday when I have the money, I'm going to pay someone to bead my fans. You know, because that was just much too difficult for me. And so, but I had 3 children, and I wanted them to all dance. I wanted them to be as if my grandmother was sitting here right beside us. I wanted them to be dressed as if she dressed them. And so it was with that idea that's how I started beadworking. And I was doing it just for my own. And when I didn't start out, I never once thought of myself as an artist. I look at myself and I see myself as a traditional woman. That's all that I am. To me, an artist is a sculptor or a painter. And, you know, this to me is something that was really specific to my grandmother's teachings. And so, you know, here again, my grandmother's been gone since July 1970. And yet, she's sitting here right beside me, she and Stevetta, and we're here talking to each of you.
And that, let's talk a little bit about the boards too, because Carl was involved with that. Can you
Hey, he
tell
gets
us
to
about
have a
that?
mic now. And you have a mic.
Well, lately, we've been using boards from the lumber company, or the wood, the specific wood company, the exotic wood company, and I've changed them. I've honed them down and make them the proper length and proper thickness. And but once I've tried making a cradle board from a log, a Bodark log, and I said, this is a big enough log that I can get 2 sets out of this. So I started chopping and chopping and chopping. And when I finished, I had 1 set of doll cradles. So we made the doll cradle. Men make weapons out of wood, and that's why men work on cradle boards. Women do the beadwork. So it's a collaboration between the two. Each is not important than the other, but each has its own work to do. So.
And that is a tradition that goes way back, the men doing the boards, because we have Jacob Aton's father, Sam Aton, always did the boards for his wife's cradles and for other women who would come say, I've got this beautiful, the beadwork body is done, but I need to mount it on the boards. And so it was a combination of the men and women to make these. There was no one else except for yourself doing these
No.
at this time?
I was the only living person in this exhibit. Everyone else was dead. I said, that says something.
And the designs traditionally are geometric like this and passed down, but Vanessa broke away from tradition in a cradle she made for the Pequot Museum. She did origin stories on it, and that was. What was the reaction of your tribal people to that?
Well, there was another cradle board at the Rhode Island. What's the name of that?
School of Design. Yes.
And it was a Kiowa cradle board, and it is a man on horseback, but you can only see him. You can't see the top of his head. You can see him from his chin down, and you can actually see he's got a long trailer on his war bonnet. And so you see this horse with this rider, and so there was that precedent already. So when I did the cradle board, it was about 25% larger than a normal size cradle. And because it was an origin story, there were some Kiowas, they had never even been around a Kiowa board. Those are what would you call them? Armchair quarterbacks, you know, they've never made a cradle board, but boy, they can talk with an authoritative voice. You know, so those kind of people, you know, you really have to kind of watch out for. And, you know, so the idea was that we picked out 4 different scenes that were important. One was the story about how the Kiowas, how they came out from under the earth. And there were so many of them that they were like ants. You know, you can see an ant pile, just crazy with activity. Well,
They've started the exhibit by asking Cradleboard, or asking artists to send them origin stories, is how that began. Because they've lost their tradition, the Pequots. They don't have any tradition of how they came to Earth. So this exhibit in their museum is at the end of a escalator that's real cold, and it represents going down into the earth. And there's, at the end of the escalator, there's a room with about 15 different tribal origin stories represented in the art. And we were lucky enough to be included.
that they selected a Cradleboard to be part of this exhibit.
So that's a unique board, and if you ever get to Mashantucket Pequot Museum, you should look for it, because it's the only one I know that is like that. All of the other Cradleboards, aside from this one in the RISD Museum that I know that I've looked at, and I've looked at it several hundred, have geometric designs, and always one side, one design, one color, the other, another color, another design. Usually, not always, but usually. Can you tell them how these, I mean, people are always asking, what about these sticks? What about, why these sticks?
You'd be surprised how many kids will come up and they'll say, is that a ski? No, no. Is it a snowshoe? No. It's a board. It's meant to hold children. And when the way this was designed, the sash, it could be draped over the pommel of a saddle. And, you know, the baby is eye level with everything. And so when you're talking, when you're getting ready to leave, you lean down and you talk to the baby inside of the Cradleboard, and you tell him, I'm going to the Indian Agency, I have an appointment, I need to talk about my farming and grazing lease. And, you know, so from the time, you know, that you talk to them as if they were an adult. And so...
And it's on the same eye level, right?
Yes, yes.
And other people come up behind you and talk to them. So it's a kind of a communication among friends.
Yes.
On that same level. And another thing that has been mentioned about cradles is that it might be too confining for the baby's legs.
No, it isn't.
And
well, the reason is when that baby is swaddled, you know, he looks like a little burrito. You know, he's tied up really tight, and it actually gives his little muscles something to work against while he's tied into this Cradleboard. And so once...
which makes him real tired, and he sleeps a lot.
Well, we cut our little grandson's umbilical cord so the child couldn't get away from us. So he's 19 now, and you know, he called what he thought was fairly early, and I think it was 11 o'clock here. I was ready for bed. I didn't want to talk to him. He said, well, tell me how it went. I don't know. He said, well, surely you must have had some reaction. Well, I was just happy nobody asked me to leave. So I was doing all right. They seemed to enjoy our visit. And that's what I look at this as. It's just a visit. And
so how about the umbilical cord, cutting it? What does that mean when you say cut it?
When you cut that baby's umbilical cord, the grandpa will take the afterbirth and he puts it in a place where it's safe so that no harm can come to him throughout his life. And for us, we went to the Indian hospital. This was my only daughter, and they stick me out in the hallway, and they've handed me these scrubs that I'm supposed to put on, but they don't tell me where I'm supposed to go to change. So I'm standing out here in the hallway. Okay, well, I don't see anybody, so I changed right there in the hallway. And when we got in and we were delivering this baby, one of the things, you say a prayer. This child, you're going to cry with joy, and also you're going to cry with sadness, because one of the greatest gifts that God gave was the gift of life. With that comes free will. How do you want to live? Do you follow me? I know that there's only honor and integrity if you follow me down this road. Now we've taken this 19-year-old child, we've been so careful with him, and now it's like we've thrown him to the wolves. And he likes living with the wolves. He has started his freshman year. He had a blast, which scared me. Anytime a young adult tells you, I had a blast, don't tell me everything then. I don't need to know. You're laughing, so you must think like my grandson. But this child, we have tried to instill in him the importance of tradition. And all of this comes together because in our culture there isn't a word for art. There isn't a word for beauty, but it's something that's important to us. When you look at this object, it's beautiful, it's sculptural, it's actually magnificent. When you think about it, or like some of the children who were tied into the Rhodes family, the cradleboard that they brought, some of those children didn't live very long. And so rather than place the baby into a coffin, they would place the baby into a cradleboard and they would bury the baby that way. And that's what my sister, with her next to the last child, her baby lived shortly after birth, and then the baby passed away. And we sent a cradle with him because traditionally you send them with their best. And so for us, that was important. Cradleboards are an important part of our Kiowa life.
And not every child was fortunate enough to have a cradle, right?
That's right.
And was it the oldest child, or was it the boy, or how was it chosen?
My children didn't have a choice. I tied each of them into a cradleboard. And
but in the earlier days, say the turn of the century,
it usually went to the adult. It was the oldest son or the oldest daughter. They were like the favorites. And so like in this case, Stevetta was like a pet. She was the favorite. And
that's the Aude Matun.
Aude, yes.
The Aude child. And in our culture, parents are told not to favor one child over another, but that this was not the way. It was perfectly all right to decide that one would be favored.
Yes.
And it was accepted.
And that one is the one that everything, for instance, my sister, she knew exactly how much my grandmother's lease man owed her. She was really the one who was supposed to be doing all of this. But life isn't fair. And, the way things happen, the cancer killed her. And so, guess what? I'm the only one living. I've outlived all of my family. And so now, you know, we're starting on grandchildren. I have granddaughters and they run and hide from me. And, you know, if I catch you, you're going with me and we're dressing you and you're going to dance. And no, you cannot take clothes to change into. You will wear dance clothes, you will sit on that bench, you cannot leave. And you'd be surprised how fast these little girls can run.
The dancing is very important to keep the traditional Kiowa beliefs alive.
Yes.
Is to have people.
And you need to start them when they're young. So this is the time to start them when they're babies. If you wait until they're 15-year-olds, if you give them half a chance, they will speak their mind. And probably what's going to come out of their mouth is not something Mama's going to like, and it's certainly not something Grandma's going to like. You know, so it's just easier. You come with me. You let me pick your wife. Let me pick your husband. And all three of my children have learned to say no. You know, and why not? You know, Grandma has more sense than you do. And I can tell you that you young men, do not flirt with the princes. Do not flirt with the young girls. They have no property. They have no money. It's Grandma's money that causes them to be dressed in this way. So that's who you should be flirting with, Grandma. I'm outspoken too.
I think in the older times, these women would gather together in families, you know, mother, daughter, aunts, and learn from each other that way. So because I guess that's not happening anymore,
No.
This kind of artwork is not going to flourish any longer. So we're fortunate to have that Vanessa has carried this on almost single-handedly among the Kiowa people.
What's fortunate for me is that Barbara and Ted were there. If they had not come, I'd still be sitting right where I am. You know, I'd still be doing the work, but with this kind of work, I tell everyone, Grandma's a dinosaur. You know, we all know what happened to dinosaurs. Grandma walked slow, so I'm going the way of the dinosaur. I have no young people coming after me who want to learn how to do this kind of work. I guess maybe I really shouldn't say that because, you know, we have my only daughter who's addicted to men, high heels, and red lipstick. In that order, and there's nothing tiny or delicate about her. She's about 5'8". She looks more like a football tackle, you know, but I was surprised. We were telling Bob the other night that she was a featured storyteller. And I got happy because I expected her to come out in braids, cloth dress, moccasins. Oh, no, no, no. We came out in black high heels, a leopard print dress, and a red lipstick. And she had her hair done up in a French twist.
But she got all the stories right.
Yeah, and he said I should be happy with that. But I said, I look forward to the time when you will be dressing like me. You'll not have any eyebrows. If you haven't noticed, I have no eyebrows. And I told my children, you're not allowed to speak at my funeral. I want everyone to think I'm this dignified old lady. And my grandson is a terrorist. He said, Grandma, he said, when you die, he said, Mama and I, we're going to take the biggest, widest black magic marker and we're going to give you a unibrow. He said, and you can't say anything, you'll already be gone. You know, so this child took great joy in that, you know, and it's just, and I'm thinking, you should be ashamed of yourself. how can you talk to your poor old grandma like that? You know, but don't listen to him either, you know, because I have a bad habit of falling. And you see my shape, tuck and roll, go with it, you know. And my grandson does this imitation of me. He said, this is my grandmother falling. Yeah. And it goes on, it's like a 15-minute fall. Don't be telling people that. You know, but this child, I said, you should be learning something important instead of something to make fun of me about. You know, but that child I have no hope for.
He'll be all right. Maybe the people would like to ask a couple of questions.
Does anybody have a question? Surely you have a question. Besides being pretty,
I
you
have a question. When your grandmother, when you were learning how to do the work, would women traditionally sit around and help each other, you know, in terms of this?
No, my mother would not have anything to do with traditional work. My
No,
mother,
your grandmother when you were learning?
my grandmother, yes.
But-
And when I was married before, and these sweet little old grandmas, somebody would bring Longhorn cheese, some other lady would bring bologna, some other lady would bring bread, somebody else would bring chips. And we'd sit there, but at 3 o'clock they knew that my ex-husband was coming home. So at 10 till 3, they would just exit. You know, but the whole purpose was just to sit. You'd be surprised how much you could accomplish just sitting. You know, that bead project, it goes quick as long as you have company. Now you have a question.
Oh my
Now you have to ask a question.
Do you stay back at home? Like, are you on, like, within your community? Like,
Yes.
where you live now?
I'm this hard-headed old woman. They're not going to be able to get rid of me. You know, I'm going to embarrass them by living a little bit longer.
And they live on top of this wonderful hill at the end of a long,
Yeah.
long dirt road, which is difficult to.
We live a half mile off the road, so it's at the end of the road on a bald hill.
You have to be coming to find me. We had an uncle. He drove all around this 160-acre allotment, and then he said, "Somebody's coming." And you could hear him cuss. He wasn't even halfway across that field, and you could hear him cussing. And he told me, "Girlie, you better get you a damn road." He said, "That's too far to be walking." I said, "Well, there's a road. It comes right up here." He said, "Well, I kept driving around." He said, "I never could find the entrance."
It's camouflage.
We were hiding from him.
And the road is difficult. My husband was always afraid to take it, especially if it were
Oh,
We
raining.
have navajos that are
Oh,
scared.
you have a
to
new
come up
road
my
now? Oh, okay. But at the end of the road, there's this wonderful, hospitable feeling of welcome and coffee and whatever, and both Carl and Vanessa are always there welcoming
Now,
visitors.
if I
Once
cook for
you get
you,
there.
you're going to be served out of the pot that I cook in. I can only make boiled meat and potatoes. That's it. But if he cooks for you, it doesn't matter if you're a vegetarian, he can cook anything. You know, and my little nephews, he had to go, he was out of state. Anyway, so my little nephews are stuck. We're sitting at the table, house rule, you know, we all sit down at the table. No, you cannot take a sandwich and go lay down in the back room. We must, if you're not going to eat, you will at least sit at this table with us. But I made a hamburger helper. And my goofy little nephew, he said, does he know you don't know how to cook? You be quiet. You know, but Yes, he knows, and he's still married to me. But Carl usually does all of the cooking, so if Carl is there, you're going to have a wonderful meal.
And they have a tornado shelter right near the house, which is used frequently.
Yes, we had a tornado right before we came out.
And I went down in a day when there was no tornado, but I
Yes,
got to see it.
yes. A tornado I can run from. I don't know how to swim, so all of your water, I don't know. No. Coming in on the plane, that's all you see is water. Where's the land at? And he said, it's there. He said, can't you see it? No, all I see is water. You know, but that's a scary thing coming in. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I'm worried about the cradleboards because it makes so much sense with the way you described the advantage of using a cradleboard when a baby starts out. And I assume you started out in a cradleboard also, but are people using them?
My little, the last two of my nephews, one was just goofy. He's forever in trouble. The other ran away from Carl and I because he said, Auntie, you've got too many rules.
He joined the
Marine Corps.
Talk about rules.
I know, at 4 o'clock, I said, just think, there's some large man just screaming at our boy right now. I said, I wonder if he thinks we have too many rules. He has a little boy, and he came to Black Leggings, and his son didn't have a choice. My nephew didn't have a choice. Our girl grabbed that baby and wrapped him up and stuck him in the cradleboard and carried him out into the dance arena. And so, yes, there's hope for my girl.
Okay.
I don't know how much hope, but yeah, there's a little bit of hope there.
There was, way back in 1898, when the anthropologist James Mooney was on the Kiowa reservation. He said, already I see that because of the trading posters carrying baby carriages, some of the women who can afford to are beginning to get baby carriages for their babies instead of the cradle boards. And then James Mooney started collecting cradle boards and collected them for the Smithsonian and for the Field Museum, but he never found out who the cradle makers were, which I will not forgive him for. I think there could be a couple of reasons. One, maybe the woman did not want her name to go to this, away from home, to this unknown place. Maybe the husband brought the cradle from his wife and gave it to Mooney, and or sold it to Mooney, and didn't pass on the name. But still, you would think that an anthropologist would have asked for the name, because a lot of the men's equipment and weapons and so forth, you know who they belong to. They passed on the name. So I think that was something having to do with the sexual differentiation and what was important. But Mooney did collect about 6 or 8 cradles, and then we talked about why they, because they were so beautifully done, and no one else was doing cradles covered with beautiful beadwork like this. There were a lot of board cradles and there were hide cradles, but Kiowa's alone did this wonderful beadwork. And it was recognized in the collecting world quite easily. And so in the 1920s and 30s, during the Depression years, people would come to and offer money, maybe $5, $20, $30, and they'd get a beautiful cradle because it was actual cash that was needed. So these cradles, many of them went away from home and never returned. And that was why part of the purpose of this project was to find the cradles that had gone away from home and to try to identify them. and identify who made them or what family they had come from.
Yes, that's what's so important about this Gifts of Pride and Love, because it tied the known cradleboard maker with that cradleboard in whatever collection or whatever museum that it was at. So that was the importance
Mhm.
of this
That's
cradleboard
right.
exhibit. And this is another thing that Barbara did. The cradleboard exhibit began in Kiowa country. You wouldn't have believed the distance that Kiowas traveled because they had heard about so-and-so's cradle was there. That was part of their family. And so they all came. It was like this big Kiowa Comanche pilgrimage to the opening and to the closing of the Gifts of Pride and Love exhibit.
And I remember there were sisters, Christine
Yeah.
and her sister, and they had a picture they had given me of their cradle, but they didn't know where it was. And I actually found it not too far away from home. I found it in the Philbrook Museum in Tulsa. And so they hadn't seen it since they were children, and they came to the opening of the exhibit and got their pictures taken in front of their cradle, and it was a real thrill for them. So that was the reward of this research, that people really could get reunited with their past. And because the cradles, they're not sacred, but they have a strong cultural significance. And
Well, I
maybe-
think of them as sacred,
Mhm.
you know, because you begin with a prayer. Like the wood, you promise this bodark. Bodark was something that was used by a man. He would make his bows, and that was to take a life. But a woman would use the same kind of wood, and it honors life. And so this bodark it has a purpose. And the same way with the deer, you promise, I'm going to use you, and we're going to make a cradleboard, and this is how you're going to be used. And then this is the place that you're going to go to. And so none of that hide is wasted. It's something that is, to me, it's quite special. And something like this was, you have no idea the effect that it had on my sister. She said, someday my children will come looking for me, she said, and I'll be waiting for them. And that, in essence, that is what you all are doing. Dawn, that's what you all were doing. You know, Carla and I, it was brought out with such reverence and ceremony. And, you know, I thought, you know, this would be really something special for Stevetta. So it was also something special for my grandmother. But I want to thank you all for asking us to be here.
When the cradle show, when it opened in each different venue, Jacob Atone, who was a Kiowa elder, would go around and smudge the cradles, each one, so that they could be safe in the new environment that they were in. And then many times the museum staff would follow around after him so that they could sort of feel the essence of what he was doing. So yes, I said they weren't sacred. By that I meant they're not the kind of thing that NAGPRA recalls as a sacred object, you know. It's not considered by the government as sacred, but it's that other informal way in which they're held. One of the participants called them a house for the beginning of life. I always thought that was a good expression.
And it is, you know, because this is their first home. You know, what better way for that life to be honored?
They go directly from their mother's womb into the cradle.
And I remember watching a 2-year-old trying to, when I was looking at a cradle in someone's home and the husband put the cradle down on the floor and the 2-year-old came running over and started undoing the wrapping so that he could try to get into it again because he remembered what it had been like in there. It's so cozy.